Hello everyone, it's Scott, and we're back for another look at Phyrexia All Will Be One spoilers. In this video, we're going to specifically look at the artifacts that were released on the first day of official spoilers, which we got a bunch of, and we'll jump in just a second. But before we do that, again, thanks to Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring our video and our content here. Remember to like and subscribe to their channel to get further Phyrexia All Will Be One spoiler videos. So let's jump in and look at the artifacts from Phyrexia All Will Be One. So our first one is Norn's Wellspring. For a colorless mana and a white, you get an artifact that whenever a creature you control dies, you scry 1 and put an oil counter on Norn's Wellspring. And then for 1, you can remove 2 oil counters from Norn's Wellspring to draw a card. I think this could really work well with some of the Phyrexian mites that we're going to see running around as creature tokens, because you're going to attack with them. They're 1/1s, they're going to die. But then every time they do, you're going to get a oil counter to put on this, and then you can start drawing cards from there. Alright, so that's probably the place for this, and I can also see it in possibly even the Soldiers deck. I know that seems kind of crazy, but I think we could see it there for this reason. You get to scry. The Soldiers deck definitely wants to scry, so you can, if you're in the mid game, you can get rid of the lands you are working with, and then you would like to draw some extra cards, and you do have some card draw in the deck, but this is another way to draw some cards in that deck. Next we have Blade of the Shared Souls. For 2 colorless mana and a blue, you get an artifact that's an equipment with the ability, with the keywords for Mirrodin, and when this equipment enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 red rebel creature token, then attach this to it. So for 3 mana, you're getting a 2/2 red rebel creature, and when the Blade of Shared Souls becomes attached to a creature, for as long as Blade of the Shared Souls remains attached to it, you may have that creature become a copy of another target creature you control. So this is a really interesting concept. We're going to see we've got lots of really large creatures in Standard right now, and what the Blade of the Shared Souls does for you is for 3 mana you get to copy something else. So this could be, in the quote Soldiers deck, this could create another copy of Valiant Veteran or of another card that you really want. So I think this is a card that is applicable to a lot of different decks. Even the Esper Rafine deck could see a use for this. So I think anywhere where we don't get legendary ruled out, I think this is probably a pretty good card if you're playing blue in your deck. Alright, Encroaching Microsense. Sorry, I'm definitely mispronouncing that one. For 3 and a blue mana, you get an artifact that non-land permanents you control are artifacts in addition to their other types. The same is true for permanent spells you control and non-land permanent cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So this is an interesting concept. So everything is an artifact. We've got a lot of things that to remove them in Standard, like Go for the Throat, that cannot hit artifacts. So this is a way of making your non-land permanents that you control artifacts in addition to their other types. So I can see this maybe seeing a little bit of play in Standard if you're really concerned about Go for the Throat, but otherwise I think it's more of a limited play piece. Next we have Urbex Forge for 2 and a red mana. It's an artifact again. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put an oil counter on Urbex Forge, then create an X1 creature that's a red Phyrexian horror creature token with trample and haste, where X is the number of oil counters on Urbex Forge. Sacrifice this token at the beginning of the next end step. So Urbex Forge actually is a pretty powerful magic card, because every single turn that it sits on the board, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So that means the token you're going to create every single turn is getting larger and larger and larger. So if this, you cast this on turn 3 and you get to turn 10, well, you've got 8 counters on it. At that point, it's an 8/1. It's going to die, but because it has the trample, damage is going to get through every single turn. And one of the things that mono red typically runs into is it runs out of steam as the game goes on. Urbex Forge is a great card for mono red because it's not going to run out of steam. You're going to have to remove it, or you're going to have to face a large creature every single turn and have to do something about it. So I think Urbex Forge is certainly a card that mono red's going to look at to put in its deck, and potentially other decks as well that want to have, you know, a lot of attacking creatures. All right, next we have Vushuk Splitter. Hopefully I said that right. For 3 and a red mana, you get equipment, and again it's got the 4 Mirrodin ability, so you get a 2/2 red rebel creature that it will be attached to when it comes into play, and the equipped creature gets +2/+0, so you're getting a 4/2 rebel creature for 4, and then if that creature dies, then for 3 mana you can equip it to another creature. So not a bad equipment, but probably one that's not really playable in standard. Certainly limited though. It's going to see some play. Next we have Conduit of World. For 2 colorless and 2 green mana, you get an artifact that you may play lands from your graveyard, because we've got a number of things that cause mill to happen in standard. There is a graveyard deck that wants to mill stuff into the graveyard, so I think this is a great card for that, because basically it says now you can just keep playing your lands from your graveyard, which is a powerful ability. And you can tap it to choose target non-land permanent card in your graveyard. If you haven't cast a spell this turn, you may cast that card. If you do, you can't cast additional spells this turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So I can see Conduit of Worlds as a great card in the late game for green, or a Jund deck, or a Gruul deck, or any kind of deck that's going to use green as a key component to it, because basically what this is allowing you to do is cast a card every single turn out of your graveyard. So you're in the late game and you draw a land. Okay, I can play my land, that's fine, but then I can go to my graveyard, pull something out, play that instead. So I think that's a pretty powerful ability, and I think this is something that we're going to see, at least people try to build around in standard. Whether it's going to be effective or not, I'm not sure, but certainly the graveyard decks, and there's a Golgari graveyard deck out there that's pretty good, that we might see that in this card in that particular deck. All right, our last artifact of the day is Bladehold War Whip. For a white mana, a red mana, and a colorless mana, you get an artifact that's an equipment, and it also has that 4 Mirrodin ability where you create the 2/2 red rebel creature token. You attach it to it, equip abilities, you activate of other equipments, you cost 1 less to activate. So this is going to be, if this does see standard play, it's going to be an equipment matter deck where you can attach things for less. And with Bladehold War Whip, that equipped creature actually gets double strike. So it's a 2/2 double striking red rebel creature token when it comes into play, which is pretty powerful. Now, the downside of it is if that creature token gets killed, well, it costs 5 mana to attach it to something else. So that's the downside of it. But the fact that it lowers the cost of attaching other auras, I think, is a good ability and playable potentially. But I don't know if it's got quite enough to make a real home in standard. But certainly playable and limited. All right, and those are the artifacts from today's release of Phyrexia All Will Be One. Again, thanks to Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring the video, and I will see you in the next video where we're going to try to talk about all the creatures that we saw today from Phyrexia All Will Be One.